There comes a moment, usually after one more small request, one more late-night phone call, one more crisis that somehow becomes your responsibility, when an empath doesn't explode. They don't scream, they don't plead, they don't even cry. Something inside them simply clicks and goes quiet. Not numb, not dead, just finished. And the people around them feel it immediately. Because when an empath stops caring in the way they used to, they don't become cruel. They become unreachable. Like a door that once stayed open has finally closed, and no amount of knocking brings it back. Carl Jung didn't use the modern word empath the way we do now, but he spent his life watching sensitive people reach a threshold that looks exactly like this. A psychological turning point where the soul stops volunteering for its own consumption. A moment where compassion stops being automatic and becomes chosen. It terrifies everyone who benefits from your softness. Because the moment you stop feeding the emotional machine, the machine starts shaking. Before we talk about the silence, we need to talk about what comes before it. The part no one calls spiritual. The part that looks ordinary from the outside, until you've lived it for years. The empath is rarely the loudest person in the room. They're the one quietly scanning the room, not judging, reading, feeling, calibrating. Their nervous system is like a receiver that never turns off. They walk into spaces and pick up the temperature immediately. What's being said, what's being hidden, what's about to erupt. At family dinners, they don't just eat. They manage the invisible war. They sense which sentence will trigger the old argument, which look will invite the guilt, which silence means someone is about to punish everyone with a mood. With friends, they don't just listen. They hold both sides. They carry the weight of every conflict like it's their job to keep the bridge from collapsing. In relationships, it gets worse, because love becomes a full-time occupation. They don't just love a partner. They regulate them. They soothe them. They anticipate them. They feel their storms before the storm has a name. And somehow, this empath becomes the emotional infrastructure of everyone's life. The shock absorber, the mediator, the translator, the calm one, the strong one. And here's the trap. They're rewarded for it. From childhood, they're praised for being understanding, for not making problems, for being mature, for keeping the peace. Every time they swallow their needs so someone else can be comfortable, someone calls them good. Every time they absorb someone's anger so the room stays stable, someone calls them wise. So self-abandonment starts to feel like a virtue, like destiny, like purpose. And because the empath's heart is real, they don't even see the bargain they're making. They think, this is love. They think, this is loyalty. They think, this is who I am. But Jung noticed something that matters here. The psyche keeps accounts, even when the ego pretends it doesn't. You can tell yourself you're fine. You can smile through disrespect. You can forgive again and again. But underneath your conscious story, the unconscious records patterns the way a predator records footprints. It does not forget what you tolerated. It does not forget who took from you and called it love. It does not forget how many times you were used as a dumping ground and then punished for needing rest. Empaths often believe their sensitivity is random, like weather, like fate. But Jung would argue the opposite. The psyche is always trying to correct imbalance. If you overgive long enough, something deeper begins to prepare a correction. And it begins quietly. It looks like overthinking. It looks like getting tired. It looks like being distant. But it's not distance. It's a ledger being filled. Let me paint you a familiar portrait. There's a person, maybe it's you, who can predict everyone's behavior with frightening accuracy. They know the exact moment a parent will turn loving into controlling. They know how a partner shifts when accountability approaches. They know which friend only calls when they're empty and wants to be refilled. They know all of this, and still, they don't weaponize it. They keep being gentle. That's the empath's strange contradiction. They can see the game, but they refuse to become a player. They keep choosing the best interpretation. They keep giving people the benefit of the doubt. They keep editing reality so love can survive. And this is where the real damage builds, not because others are flawed, but because the empath starts betraying their own perception. They sense something is wrong, but they rationalize it. They feel a boundary being crossed, but they swallow it. They hear their gut scream, but they call it anxiety. So the betrayal that breaks them is rarely just one event. It's the moment they finally admit, "I knew, and I stayed." That's what cuts deeper than infidelity, deeper than lies, deeper than smear campaigns. Because the empath doesn't only grieve the betrayal, they grieve the years they spent talking themselves out of the truth. This is why the breaking point often arrives as one clean, shocking moment. A message discovered, a truth overheard, a lie revealed so clearly it can't be softened anymore. And suddenly everything collapses. Not the empath's heart, but the empath's illusions. Jung called this the withdrawal of projections. For years, the empath has been projecting goodness onto people who offered crumbs, projecting potential onto people who preferred comfort, projecting innocence onto people who repeatedly showed intent. They weren't seeing who others were. They were seeing who they hoped others would become. When those projections fall away, there's a moment that feels like waking up in a room you've lived in your whole life and realizing the walls were painted to hide cracks. And this is where everyone expects the empath to break the way a movie tells you they should. Rage, sobbing, spiraling, public collapse. But what happens instead is far more unsettling. They get quiet, not passive, not weak, quiet like a blade in a sheath, quiet like a storm holding still. Their face changes, their eyes change. Not because tears arrive, because clarity arrives. The empath stops performing emotional labor. They stop translating the room. They stop smoothing edges. They stop managing reactions. They stop explaining themselves like they're on trial for needing basic respect. And the scariest part? They don't announce it. They don't write a dramatic paragraph. They don't make a speech. They don't try to teach a lesson. They simply stop participating. That's when the system panics, because family members who relied on them to mediate suddenly have to face each other raw. Partners who used them as an emotional crutch try to provoke the old reactions and discover there's no grip anymore. Friends who treated them like a free therapist hit a wall where endless availability used to be, and the people around them often misread it at first. They call it cold, they call it selfish, they call it "you've changed." But Jung would say, yes, this is change, this is integration, because every empath carries a shadow self they were trained to reject. The part that says, "No, I won't. That's not mine to carry. You can handle your own consequences. I refuse." Society teaches the empath that this part is dangerous, that prioritizing yourself is cruelty, that boundaries are betrayal, that real love means endless sacrifice. But Jung understood the shadow isn't evil. It's the immune system of the psyche. It's the part of you built to prevent annihilation. When the empath finally integrates that shadow, something rare is born. A person who can feel deeply without being drained. A person who can love without being used. A person who can see manipulation without performing innocence to keep the peace. This is not the empath becoming hard. This is the empath becoming whole. And once wholeness arrives, the rules change. They become selective, not because they hate people, but because they finally recognize what their energy costs. They stop responding instantly to emotional bait. They stop rushing to rescue. They stop opening the door to chaos simply because chaos knocks loudly. They say no without a paragraph. They leave without a debate. They disengage without needing to win. And that's why it feels like untouchability, because people know how to control the empath who still needs to be seen as good. They know how to guilt them. They know how to cry in the right way. They know how to threaten abandonment, then offer crumbs of affection. But an empath who has integrated the shadow is psychologically unbribable. Praise doesn't hypnotize them. Criticism doesn't destabilize them. Guilt doesn't move them. Not because they're arrogant, because they're no longer negotiable. This is where outside observers miss the point. The empath did not stop caring about human beings. They stopped caring about maintaining relationships that require self-betrayal. They stopped caring about being liked by people who never truly valued them. They stopped caring about keeping peace in systems built on their silent suffering. And the consequences ripple everywhere. In the workplace, the go-to person who used to absorb everyone's stress stops volunteering to be exploited. They still do excellent work, but they stop carrying other people's responsibilities. They stop managing office emotions. They stop being the invisible glue that keeps dysfunction looking organized. At first, productivity can dip, not because they became lazy, but because the system was designed around their overfunctioning. In family systems, the collapse can be dramatic. The empath, who used to host, mediate, soothe, absorb, becomes unavailable. Not in a hateful way, in a clean way. They'll still love you, but they won't drown with you. They'll smile, but they won't engage the drama. They'll say, "That doesn't work for me," and they won't apologize for it. This is usually when the accusations arrive. How could you be so selfish? What happened to you? You're not the same. And the empath may simply nod. Because yes, they're not the same. They finally stopped setting themselves on fire to keep others warm. Romantic relationships reveal the truth most violently. Some partners rise to meet the new boundary. They realize what they've been taking. They mature. They become accountable. They learn reciprocity. Those relationships can transform into something real. Two sovereign adults choosing each other, not one person parenting the other emotionally. But other partners can't adapt. They miss the version of the empath who absorbed their chaos and asked for nothing. When their old tactics fail, they often leave to find a new empath to feed on. And the awakened empath lets them go with a calm that looks impossible. Not because they never loved, because they finally recognize that losing exploitation is not losing love. It's losing a wound. Jung observed something disturbing in this stage. The empath's indifference doesn't just upset people, it exposes them. Because the empath's old role was hiding how dysfunctional everything really was. When they stop mediating, the family sees itself. When they stop soothing, the relationship reveals itself. When they stop carrying, the group collapses into its true weight. And the people who benefited from the empath's self-erasure finally realize what they lost. But by then, the empath has moved beyond needing their realization. This isn't revenge, this is sovereignty. Here's what makes this stage both beautiful and terrifying. Awakened empaths become extremely difficult to manipulate, not because they learned tricks, but because they stopped lying to themselves. They recognize patterns quickly. They sense inauthenticity early. They detect love bombing, gaslighting, future promises that never become actions. And they don't engage. They could weaponize what they know. They understand people at a depth that could be used to devastate. But they don't. They remove themselves. They protect their peace. They invest their empathy where it is respected. That restraint is not weakness. It's mastery. And it creates what you might call a mirror effect. The awakened empath's presence makes dishonest people uncomfortable. Manipulators feel exposed without a single accusation. Energy vampires sense there's nothing to feed on and drift away to easier targets. Meanwhile, authentic people feel safe around them because for the first time, they're being seen clearly without being consumed. The empath becomes a living filter, not by force, by integrity. And then the rebuilding begins. They choose work that honors sensitivity instead of exploiting it. They create homes that feel like sanctuaries, not emergency rooms. They form friendships based on reciprocity, not rescue. They date and love as whole people, not as fixers. Their time becomes precious. Their energy becomes sacred. Their boundaries become non-negotiable. They learn a truth Jung spent his life circling. Real compassion without self-respect becomes martyrdom. And martyrdom doesn't heal anyone. It simply trains others to take more. So the empath who stops caring is not losing their heart. They are finally protecting it. They haven't become cold. They've become conscious. They haven't stopped loving. They've learned to love themselves with the same fierce devotion they once handed out indiscriminately. This is why the silence is so powerful. Because it's not emptiness. It's the sound of the psyche no longer negotiating with its own destruction. If you're in this stage, if you feel that strange quiet inside, don't let anyone shame you back into being consumable. You are not broken. You are integrated. You are not cruel. You are clear. And the moment you stop caring about maintaining peace in toxic systems is the moment you start caring about cultivating peace in your own soul. That isn't the end of your story. That is the beginning of your sovereignty. If this hits something in you, comment, "I am done." Not because you're giving up, because you're finally choosing yourself.